Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The gentle whisper of the library's cooling machinery serenaded Ezekiel as he meticulously arranged the day's final book. He gently brushed his fingertips across the elegant embossment of the title, feeling the raised letters beneath his touch. As the soft whirring filled the room, Ezekiel found solace in the simple act of organizing knowledge, his gaze trailing along the shelves filled with endless stories and wisdom. The library had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the worlds of others and escape the nagging feeling that something was missing in his own life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the tall windows, Ezekiel found himself alone in the building. He walked down the aisles, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Pausing at the fashion section, he glanced furtively around before pulling out a glossy magazine. The pages whispered as he turned them, his eyes drinking in the images of elegant women in flowing dresses and stylish pantsuits. He'd always admired their confidence, the way they carried themselves with such grace. A sigh escaped his lips as he closed the magazine and returned it to its place. Ezekiel's gaze fell on his reflection in a nearby window. His mousy brown hair hung limply around his face, and his ill-fitting sweater did little to flatter his slender frame. He ran a hand through his hair, imagining for a moment how it would feel to have long, silky tresses framing his face. The sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket startled him out of his reverie. He fumbled to answer it, his voice soft and hesitant. "Hello?" "Ezekiel, darling!" His mother's cheerful voice filled the line. "I hope I'm not interrupting your important librarian duties." He smiled despite himself. "No, Mom. I'm just closing up for the night." "Well, I won't keep you long. I just wanted to remind you about your cousin's wedding next month. Have you thought about what you're going to wear?" Ezekiel's stomach twisted. Social events always filled him with dread, and the thought of standing awkwardly in a suit while everyone else danced and laughed made him want to crawl under the nearest table. I haven't really given it much thought." His mother's sigh crackled through the phone. "Oh, Ezekiel, you can't just throw on the same old thing. This is a special occasion. Why don't you treat yourself to a makeover? Get a new haircut, maybe some new clothes." The word makeover sent a thrill through Ezekiel's body. He'd always secretly fantasized about a transformation, but the thought of walking into a salon or clothing store filled him with terror. "I don't know, Mom. You know I'm not good with that sort of thing." "Nonsense. Everyone needs a little pampering now and then. Oh, I know just the person. My friend Greta's daughter, Mabel, is a stylist. She's supposed to be wonderful. Why don't I give you her number?" Before Ezekiel could protest, his mother was rattling off the digits. He dutifully wrote them down, his hand shaking slightly. "Thanks, Mom. I'll think about it." After saying goodbye, Ezekiel stared at the number on the scrap of paper. His heart raced at the possibility of what it could mean. Taking a deep breath, he punched the numbers into his phone before he could lose his nerve. The line rang twice before a warm, husky voice answered. "Hello, Mabel speaking." Ezekiel's voice caught in his throat. "Hi, my name is Ezekiel. My mom's friend Greta gave me your number. I was wondering if you do makeovers." There was a pause, and Ezekiel feared he'd said something wrong. Then Mabel's voice came back, filled with enthusiasm. "Of course! I love helping people discover their best selves. What did you have in mind?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. Ezekiel closed his eyes, gathering every ounce of courage he possessed. I want to know what it's like to be beautiful, to be seen as a woman. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Ezekiel's heart pounded in his ears, and he was about to hang up when Mabel spoke again, her voice kind and understanding. Ezekiel, I think that's wonderful. Everyone deserves to explore all facets of themselves. Why don't you come to my studio tomorrow evening? We'll have privacy, and I promise to create a safe, judgment-free space for you. Relief washed over Ezekiel like a warm wave. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They made arrangements for the following evening, and as Ezekiel hung up the phone, he felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. He finished locking up the library, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. The next day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Ezekiel fumbled through his duties at the library, his thoughts constantly drifting to his upcoming appointment. By the time closing hour arrived, his nerves were frayed to the breaking point. He stood outside Mabel's studio, a nondescript storefront in a quiet part of town. The sign in the window read, Mabel's Transformations, in elegant script. Ezekiel's hand hovered over the door handle, trembling slightly. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and pushed the door open. A bell tinkled softly as he entered. The studio was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the faint scent of lavender in the air. Plush chairs lined one wall, facing a row of mirrors and styling stations. "Hello?" Ezekiel called out, his voice barely above a whisper. Footsteps approached from a back room, and a woman appeared. She was tall and statuesque, with vibrant red hair cascading over her shoulders in loose waves. Her emerald green eyes sparkled with warmth as she smiled at Ezekiel. "You must be Ezekiel," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Mabel. It's wonderful to meet you." Ezekiel shook her hand, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Mabel's smile widened. "Of course. I'm honored that you've trusted me with this. Why don't we have a seat and talk about what you're hoping to achieve today?" She led him to a cozy seating area in the corner of the studio. Ezekiel perched on the edge of a plush armchair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Mabel sat across from him, her posture relaxed and open. "So, Ezekiel," she began, her voice gentle, "tell me a little about why you're here today." Ezekiel swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the floor. I've always been fascinated by women's fashion, the way they can express themselves through clothing and makeup. I've never felt comfortable in my own skin. I want to know what it's like to feel beautiful, to feel like myself. Mabel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a very brave thing to admit, Ezekiel. Many people go their whole lives without exploring these feelings. Can you tell me more about what you envision? Is there a particular style or look you're drawn to?" Ezekiel's cheeks flushed. I'm not sure. I've always admired elegant, classic styles. Nothing too flashy. I just want to feel pretty." "I think we can definitely work with that," Mabel said with a smile. "How about we start with a makeover? We'll do your hair, makeup, and find you an outfit that makes you feel confident and beautiful. Does that sound good?" Ezekiel nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness churning in his stomach. Mabel stood, offering her hand to help Ezekiel up. "All right then, let's begin with your hair. I think some soft waves would frame your face beautifully." She led him to one of the styling chairs, draping a cape around his shoulders. As she began to work on his hair, Ezekiel closed his eyes, letting himself relax into her expert touch. "Tell me a little about yourself, Ezekiel," Mabel said as she applied product to his hair. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a librarian," he replied, his voice growing steadier as he spoke about familiar territory. "I've always loved books. They're like portals to other worlds, you know?" Mabel nodded, her fingers working deftly through his hair. "That sounds wonderful. Do you have a favorite genre?" "Historical fiction," Ezekiel said, a small smile playing on his lips. "I love imagining what life was like in different eras, especially the fashion, the elaborate dresses, the careful etiquette. It's all so fascinating." "I can see why that would appeal to you," Mabel said, her voice warm with understanding. "Fashion has always been a powerful form of self-expression. It's a shame that men's fashion tends to be so limited in comparison." Ezekiel nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for Mabel's easy acceptance. "Exactly. I've always envied women's ability to play with different styles and silhouettes. Men's clothing feels so restrictive." As Mabel worked, transforming Ezekiel's lank hair into soft, feminine waves, they talked about books, fashion, and life. With each passing minute, Ezekiel felt more at ease, his initial nervousness melting away under Mabel's kind attention. Finally, Mabel stepped back, admiring her handiwork. "There we go. What do you think?" Ezekiel opened his eyes, gasping softly as he saw his reflection. His hair now fell in gentle waves around his face, softening his features and giving him an almost ethereal appearance. It's beautiful," he whispered, reaching up to touch a silky strand. Mabel beamed. "I'm glad you like it. Now, let's move on to makeup. I'm thinking a natural look to enhance your features. How does that sound?" Ezekiel nodded eagerly, his eyes shining with excitement. As Mabel began applying foundation, she explained each step of the process, teaching Ezekiel about different products and techniques. "The key is to enhance your natural beauty, not mask it," she said, as she blended eyeshadow across his lids. "We want to bring out your best features and make you feel confident." As the transformation continued, Ezekiel felt a sense of rightness settling over him. Each brushstroke, each careful application of color, felt like a step towards becoming the person he'd always longed to be. Finally, Mabel applied a soft pink lipstick, blotting it gently. "There," she said, stepping back. "Take a look." Ezekiel turned to the mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The person staring back at him was beautiful. His eyes, accentuated with subtle makeup, looked larger and more expressive. His cheekbones seemed higher, his lips fuller. It was still recognizably him, but a version of himself he'd only ever dreamed about. "Oh," he breathed, touching his face gently. Is that really me?" Mabel squeezed his shoulder. "It is. You look stunning, Ezekiel. How do you feel?" I feel... He paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like I'm seeing myself for the first time." Mabel's smile was radiant. "That's exactly what I love to hear. Now, let's find you an outfit to complete the look. I have a few dresses that I think would suit you perfectly." She led Ezekiel to a rack of clothing, pulling out a few options. After some deliberation, they settled on a deep blue wrap dress with 3/4 sleeves. The fabric was soft and flowing, draping elegantly over Ezekiel's slender frame. "The changing room is right over there," Mabel said, handing him the dress. "Take your time, and let me know if you need any help." Ezekiel nodded, taking the dress with trembling hands. In the privacy of the changing room, he carefully slipped out of his everyday clothes. As he pulled on the dress, adjusting it to sit properly, he felt a thrill of excitement run through him. He emerged from the changing room, his steps hesitant. Mabel gasped softly, her eyes widening. "Ezekiel, you look absolutely breathtaking." She guided him to the full-length mirror, and Ezekiel felt his world shift. The person staring back at him was everything he'd ever dreamed of being. The dress hugged his waist before flowing out gracefully, creating the illusion of curves. His hair framed his face in soft waves, and his makeup enhanced his delicate features. For the first time in his life, Ezekiel felt truly beautiful.
I don't know what to say,"
he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Mabel squeezed his hand. "You don't have to say anything. Just enjoy this moment. This is you, Ezekiel. The real you." Tears welled up in Ezekiel's eyes, threatening to ruin his carefully applied makeup. Mabel quickly dabbed at them with a tissue, her touch gentle. Now, she said softly. "No crying, or we'll have to redo your mascara. How about we take this new you out for a spin? There's a lovely little cafe just down the street. We could go for a cup of coffee, let you experience being out in the world like this. Only if you're comfortable, of course." Ezekiel hesitated, fear and excitement warring within him. The thought of going out in public dressed like this was terrifying, but the desire to fully embrace this newfound part of himself was stronger. I think I'd like that," he said, surprising himself with his own boldness. Mabel clapped her hands together. "Wonderful! Let me just grab my purse and we'll be on our way." As they stepped out of the studio into the cool evening air, Ezekiel felt exposed and vulnerable. He tugged nervously at the hem of his dress, suddenly aware of every glance from passers-by. Mabel linked her arm through his, giving him a reassuring smile. "Relax," she murmured. "You look beautiful, and you have every right to be here. Just breathe and enjoy the moment." They walked arm in arm down the street, Ezekiel gradually relaxing as he realized that no one was pointing or staring. In fact, most people barely gave them a second glance. Those who did often smiled appreciatively, clearly seeing two stylish women out for an evening stroll. The cafe was a cozy, dimly lit space with soft jazz playing in the background. Mabel led them to a small table in the corner, pulling out Ezekiel's chair for him. As he sat, smoothing his dress beneath him, Ezekiel marveled at how natural the movement felt. A waiter approached their table, smiling warmly. "Good evening, ladies. What can I get for you?" Ezekiel's heart skipped a beat at being addressed as a woman. He glanced at Mabel, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll have a latte, please," Ezekiel said, his voice soft but steady. "Make that too," Mabel added. As the waiter walked away, Ezekiel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That was exhilarating," he admitted, a small smile playing on his lips. Mabel beamed at him. "You did wonderfully. How does it feel being out like this?" Ezekiel took a moment to consider the question. "It feels right," he said finally. "Like I'm finally being seen as the person I've always felt I was inside." "But it's also terrifying. What if someone recognizes me? What if they judge me?" Mabel reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Those are valid concerns, Ezekiel. But remember, you're not doing anything wrong. You're exploring a part of yourself, and that's beautiful. Anyone who would judge you for that isn't worth your time or energy. Their lattes arrived, and Ezekiel took a sip, careful not to smudge his lipstick. The normalcy of the moment, two women enjoying coffee together, filled him with a sense of peace. As they chatted, Ezekiel found himself opening up more than he ever had before. He shared his dreams, his fears, and his long-suppressed desire to explore his feminine side. Mabel listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and understanding. You know, Mabel said as they finished their coffee, there's a whole community of people who share similar experiences to yours. Have you ever considered connecting with them? Ezekiel shook his head. I wouldn't know where to start. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. This is all so new. Mabel nodded. Of course. There's no rush. Take your time to explore and understand yourself. But when you're ready, know that there are people out there who would welcome you with open arms. As they left the cafe, Ezekiel felt a mix of sadness and gratitude. The evening had been magical, but he knew it was coming to an end. Soon, he'd have to return to his everyday life, to being the shy librarian in ill-fitting clothes. Back at the studio, Mabel helped Ezekiel remove his makeup and change back into his regular clothes. As he looked at his reflection, now back to his usual self, Ezekiel felt a pang of loss.
Thank you,
he said, turning to Mabel. For everything, this evening, it meant more to me than I can express. Mabel pulled him into a warm hug. You're welcome, Ezekiel. Remember, this part of you doesn't disappear just because you've changed your clothes. It's always there, waiting to be embraced. As Ezekiel prepared to leave, Mabel handed him a small bag. A few things to help you continue exploring at home, she explained. Some makeup basics and a few accessories. And my card, if you ever want to talk or schedule another session. Ezekiel clutched the bag to his chest, feeling as though he'd been given a precious treasure.
Thank you,
he said again, his voice thick with emotion. Mabel smiled warmly. Go be yourself, Ezekiel. All of yourself. The world is waiting to meet the real you. As Ezekiel stepped out into the night, he felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had been lifted. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt hope. He walked home through the quiet streets, the bag of makeup and accessories, a comforting weight in his hand. The memory of his reflection, beautiful, confident, feminine, stayed with him, a secret smile playing on his lips. When he reached his apartment, Ezekiel paused before entering. He took a deep breath, savoring the lingering scent of Mabel's perfume on his skin. Then, with a sense of determination he'd never felt before, he stepped inside. The coming days and weeks would bring challenges and discoveries. There would be moments of doubt and fear, but also moments of joy and self-discovery. Ezekiel knew he had a long way to go in understanding and accepting this part of himself, but he was no longer alone on the journey. As he got ready for bed that night, Ezekiel caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, he saw a flash of the woman he'd been earlier that evening, confident, beautiful, and, most importantly, herself. He smiled, touching his face gently.
Hello,
he whispered to his reflection.
It's nice to finally meet you.
With that, Ezekiel turned off the light and went to bed, dreaming of flowing dresses, soft makeup, and a future where he could be his true self in all its complex, beautiful glory. Thanks for watching, my girlies. Be sure to check out Patreon for more.